In the quiet, early hours of a November morning, the security camera overlooking an otherwise ordinary parking lot captured an image that would later unravel a horrifying truth. A small white Vauxhall Corsa rolled slowly out of its designated space, its headlights dim against the hushed darkness. Behind the wheel sat a lone figure, a man, hood pulled low, face tipped downward as if trying to hide from the world. Though at first glance nothing seemed unusual, the absence of one specific vehicle raised immediate alarm. Phoenix Spencer Horn's car, marked with a 21 plate registration, was still parked where she left it. That moment, captured in grainy footage, would become the final confirmed sighting connected to the young woman. Phoenix Spencer Horn, only 21 years old, belonged to East Kilbride, a peaceful town where most people knew each other by name and where suspicious activity rarely occurred. She worked at the Strathaven Hotel, a small but cozy establishment where her warm personality and gentle manner had made her a favorite among regulars. She was known as the kind of girl who remembered how her elderly guests liked their tea, who laughed easily, and who cared deeply for the people in her life. To her friends and family, Phoenix often spoke with unmistakable affection about her boyfriend, Methan, a 27-year-old laborer who lived with her in a modest ground-floor flat. According to her, he was the love of her life. But love, as her mother later said through tears, can sometimes blind even the brightest souls. Their neighbors would remember hearing unsettling noises coming from the flat, not loud enough to call the police, but uncomfortable. Muffled arguments, a sudden thud, then an eerie silence afterward. Nothing ever escalated to violence, at least not publicly, but something about the atmosphere always felt tense. On the cold night of November 16, 2024, Phoenix finished a late shift at the hotel. She seemed tired but cheerful, telling a coworker she planned to call her mother once she reached home. True to her word, she sent a brief message, "I'll call you tomorrow." Those 5 simple words, ordinary, routine, would become the last communication her mother ever received from her. Around 9 p.m., Phoenix returned to the small flat she shared with Methan. A few neighbors later mentioned that the living room lights stayed on far later than usual. They were accustomed to Phoenix winding down early, often asleep by midnight. But on this night, shortly after midnight, the lights snapped off abruptly, as if someone had flipped the switch with deliberate finality. Then came the noises, not the chaotic sounds people imagine when a crime occurs. There were no screams or frantic collisions. Instead, what drifted through the stillness of the building were strange, rhythmic sounds. Running water, a chair dragged slowly across the floor, footsteps shifting weight back and forth. Nothing that could be placed with certainty, but enough to unsettle the few who were awake to hear them. Investigators would later pinpoint 12:13 a.m. as the likely moment when everything changed, when the incident, whatever it truly was, began. The hours following Phoenix's return home were shrouded in quiet darkness. No one saw her again. No one heard her cheerful voice, no late-night messages, nothing. Her presence appeared to vanish as if swallowed by the night. The next morning, while the town went about its usual routines, a white Vauxhall Corsa glided out of the apartment complex's parking lot. In the driver's seat was Methan, though he attempted to conceal himself beneath Phoenix's jacket. The hood was drawn over his head. His posture was stiff, his movements mechanical. The cameras caught his face clearly enough to identify him, but his expression, blank, subdued, unreadable, confused many who later reviewed the footage. Over the next 2 days, he continued moving through the town, always alone. He visited gas stations, he entered grocery stores, he bought items at pharmacies. He drove aimlessly, yet not once did anyone see Phoenix with him. Her absence became increasingly alarming. Phoenix was not the kind of person who disconnected from the world. She never missed a work shift, never let a text go unanswered, and would never ignore her mother's calls, especially not for 2 days. Yet the messages her family received during that time felt disturbingly unlike her. One text read, "I need a break, everything is okay." The tone was wrong, cold, abrupt, emotionless. Phoenix rarely sent such short replies, and she certainly didn't use odd punctuation or avoid questions. Her mother immediately felt something was off. Meanwhile, behind the closed door of the ground floor flat, an unsettling odor slowly began to seep into the hallway. At first faint, then unmistakable. Neighbors described it as a heavy, sour smell that made their stomachs twist. One concerned resident knocked on the couple's door, but no one answered. When she glanced through the letterbox opening, the flat was still and silent. Curtains pulled tightly shut, no flicker of movement, Later that afternoon, someone saw Methan step out briefly. His face was drained of all color. He carried Phoenix's car keys loosely in his hand as if he wasn't fully aware he was holding them. On a balcony overlooking the complex, a neighbor from the next building watched him sit in the cold for nearly an hour, a bottle of wine dangling from his fingers, staring at nothing. By this point, tension seeped into every corner of the neighborhood. Everyone sensed something was terribly wrong. What shocked investigators most was that the first person to contact authorities wasn't Phoenix's mother, a friend, or a neighbor. It was Methan himself. On the morning of November 18, 2 days after Phoenix was last seen, he stepped outside the building and dialed emergency services. His voice was devoid of color, flat, quiet, expressionless. Not frantic, not grieving. Simply empty. The dispatcher later told reporters that the tone of the call sent a chill through her, though she couldn't explain exactly why. When police arrived for a welfare check, they found Methan standing at the front entrance of the apartment building. He wasn't pacing or distraught. He didn't attempt to explain much. He held the keys loosely in one hand and stared at the officers with a blankness that one described as emotionally hollow. The officers broke down the door, fearing someone inside might require medical attention. Nothing could prepare them for what they found. The main living space was eerily calm. Not a cushion out of place. Plates and utensils neatly arranged on the dining table. A half-finished glass of red wine perched on the stove. Clothes folded in a basket. The spotless arrangement felt wrong, too perfect given the circumstances. But when the officers reached the bedroom, the illusion of normalcy shattered. Phoenix's body lay on the floor in a state no one could comprehend without horror. She had been violently dismembered after death. Blood-soaked clothing lay near her. Her head had been placed deliberately to the side, almost carefully. The scene was horrifying, yet strangely restrained. No wild splashes of blood across the walls, no chaotic destruction. Beneath the bed, officers discovered the only significant pool of blood, hidden from quick view. As if whoever cleaned the room had focused on visible areas but overlooked the dark space beneath the frame. Phoenix's phone was later found on the kitchen table. On it was a typed but unsent message, just 2 words. Investigators never publicly revealed what those words were, but their existence told one devastating truth. Phoenix had tried to call for help. She simply never got the chance to send the message. When questioned, Methan insisted he remembered nothing. He repeated that phrase again and again, claiming his mind was foggy, that emotions had overwhelmed him, that everything was a blur. Investigators, however, were not convinced. His timeline shifted constantly. First he suggested the confrontation happened late at night. Then he insisted it occurred early in the morning. His story bent and twisted with each retelling. Experienced officers noticed his unconscious behaviors, averted eye contact, subtle lip licking, quick subject changes. Signs of evasion. One key moment cracked his carefully rehearsed facade. A detective casually asked, "Did you see a small black-handled knife when you were cleaning?" The knife had never been mentioned, not once. Without thinking, Methan nodded and muttered, "Yeah, I moved it." The room fell silent. Investigators exchanged looks. He had just confirmed knowledge that no innocent person could possibly possess. The autopsy uncovered truths more disturbing than the scene itself. Phoenix had been strangled from behind with such force that she barely had time to defend herself. There were no injuries on her arms, no defensive wounds, suggesting she had been caught entirely by surprise, possibly unconscious during the attack. 2 key forensic findings sealed the direction of the investigation. Black hair clutched in Phoenix's hand, not her own. Human tissue under her toenails, matching Methan's DNA. Inside the apartment, crime scene technicians found a single latex glove behind a cabinet. Strong chemical scents lingering in the bathroom. A broken trail of smeared blood under the bed. A paper bag in the trash containing long strands of Phoenix's hair. All of it pointed to a meticulous cleanup, not a momentary loss of control. But the most damning discovery came from Methan's phone. Buried in a concealed folder, time-stamped at 2 a.m., was a photo of Phoenix's body. He had taken it hours before he called the police. For the first few days after Timothy Valen claimed to be Edgar Whitefield's killer, Melissa tried to settle back into a kind of routine, but the atmosphere in the house had changed in a way she couldn't put into words. It wasn't anything obvious, no new noises, no strange movements, but a subtle heaviness clung to the rooms, a feeling like a shadow stretched across every corner. At night, their bedroom felt colder than usual, as if a window had been left open even when it hadn't. She would wake up and find Timothy sitting on the edge of the bed, perfectly still, staring at the floor with unfocused eyes. "Tim," she whispered after one such night, careful not to startle him. He didn't look back. "I didn't do anything wrong," he said, his voice low, too calm. "I know," she assured him. "But we'll talk to someone if you need to." "I don't need to talk to anyone." He finally stood and walked out of the room, leaving her in the lingering cold. What unsettled her wasn't just his words, it was how certain he sounded. It was 3 days later when the first real crack appeared. Melissa was organizing old receipts in the living room while Timothy sat across from her, headphones in, staring blankly at his laptop. He wasn't watching anything. She noticed the screen had been paused for several minutes, the cursor blinking over a blank search bar. His eyes weren't focused on the screen at all. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. He didn't answer. After a moment, he removed one earcup and blinked, as if waking from a trance. "What? You're zoning out a lot lately," she said. "Is your head hurting again?" He rubbed the back of his neck, fingers trembling despite his attempt to keep them steady. "It's just memories," he muttered. "Of the library?" she asked gently. He nodded, though there was uncertainty in the gesture. "Yes, the library," but something about the way he said it made her chest tighten. He wasn't convincing, he was trying to convince himself. Detective Leroy Cho arrived one afternoon to check on Timothy's condition. His knock echoed through the house like an announcement of something unavoidable. When Melissa opened the door, the detective greeted her politely, but his eyes shifted quickly past her, scanning the living room. "Just following up," he explained. "I wanted to make sure Timothy is doing okay." "Of course," Melissa said. "He's here." Before she could finish, Timothy stepped out of the hallway. He looked pale, startled, like he had been caught doing something wrong. Detective Cho studied him carefully. "Timothy," he said gently, "you mind if we talk for a minute?" Melissa watched from the doorway as the two men sat at the kitchen table. She tried not to listen, but certain words drifted through the hallway with unsettling clarity. "Your statement, no evidence. You don't have to claim responsibility. Why do you feel like you did this?" Timothy didn't raise his voice, but she heard the rigid tone in it. "Because I remember." "You can't tell me I don't." Detective Cho paused. "No one is calling you a liar," he said carefully. "We're trying to understand why you're—" "I said I remember," Timothy repeated, louder. Melissa's chest tightened. This wasn't stubbornness. It was fear, deep, confused fear. When the detective finally left, he pulled Melissa aside quietly. "Has he been sleeping?" "Not much," she admitted. "He seems overwhelmed." "Call me if it gets worse," Cho said. "And I mean it." His expression was serious enough that she didn't argue. Later that evening, after Timothy went to the shower, Melissa stayed in the kitchen cleaning up their dinner plates. She tried to focus on the simple rhythm: rinse, soap, water, but her mind wandered back to the detective's concerned voice, to Timothy's strange certainty, to the way the house felt wrong. When she finished, she grabbed one of Timothy's plates from earlier, noticing a small dark splash of something near the sink. She lifted her hand, wiping at it with a towel. It wasn't food. It wasn't sauce. It was dark, flaky. She leaned closer. Blood. Fresh. Before she could fully process the thought, the bathroom door clicked open, and Timothy stepped out, hair damp, shirt clinging slightly to his torso. He looked exhausted, but something else, too. There were faint pink scratches on his hips, half hidden beneath his shirt. "Tim," she said gently, trying not to sound alarmed. "You're bleeding." He looked down. "Oh, that, what happened?" "Probably from work, or the car seat. You don't usually scratch yourself that deeply," she said, voice quiet. "Tim, did you hurt yourself?" He bit the inside of his cheek, tension rising in his shoulders. "No," he said sharply. "I didn't." She didn't believe him, not because she thought he was lying, but because he seemed genuinely unaware. As if he didn't know how he got hurt. That night, Melissa woke up to Timothy thrashing beside her. His breaths came fast and shallow, hands gripping the blanket so tightly his knuckles whitened. She shook him gently. Tim, wake up." He gasped, jerking upright. Sweat clung to his forehead, and his eyes darted wildly around the room as if searching for something, that wasn't there. "What did you dream?" she whispered, brushing his arm. He swallowed hard. "There was a room," he said slowly. "But I've never been in it before." "What room?" "I don't know. Brick walls. A table. Someone was sitting across from me, but I couldn't see their face." He shook his head, running both hands through his hair. It felt real, he murmured. Like a memory trying to come back. But not all of it. Just pieces. A chill ran down her spine. Is it about Edgar? She asked softly. His breathing stuttered, just slightly. I think so, he whispered. And when he said that, she realized something terrible. He didn't sound guilty. He sounded afraid, as if whatever he thought he remembered wasn't something he chose to remember. But something chasing him. The next 2 days were a slow drift. Their conversations felt thin, stretched across an invisible distance. Timothy struggled to stay focused. He misplaced objects, forgot conversations they'd had hours earlier, and sometimes responded to questions a beat too late, like someone translating thoughts through fog. Melissa wanted to help him, wanted to pull him close and tell him everything would be okay, but the truth was more complicated. She wasn't just worried for him anymore. She was worried of something surrounding him. Not Timothy himself, never him, but the shadow of whatever was happening inside his mind. One evening as she folded laundry, she found one of his shirts with tiny rust-colored stains around the bottom seam. She checked the inside. More dried blood. She didn't confront him, not yet. Not until she understood what she was asking. Because some small, quiet part of her wondered. What if he really did do something that night? What if his mind hid it for a reason? She pushed the thought away. But thoughts like that don't leave. They linger. On a Thursday afternoon, Timothy's supervisor phoned Melissa directly. Has Timothy been feeling all right lately? The man asked hesitantly. She felt her stomach tighten. Why? He's been distracted. Yesterday he left a machine running and walked away from it. Today he didn't respond when someone called him 3 times. Has he said anything to you? She asked quietly. A few odd things, the supervisor admitted. Nothing dangerous. Just, he asked one of the guys if they'd ever felt like they remembered something that wasn't theirs. Melissa closed her eyes. Is he okay? The supervisor asked. She didn't have an answer. That night, she found Timothy sitting on the couch in the dark, the television turned off, the room silent. Tim, she stepped toward him. Why aren't the lights on? I didn't notice, he murmured. His voice was distant, thin. She sat beside him, reaching for his hand. His fingers were cold, too cold. Tell me what's happening, she whispered. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out. He turned to her slowly. His eyes looked hollow, like something behind them was missing. I don't think those memories are mine, he said quietly. She felt her heart drop. What do you mean? He swallowed, breath shaking. When I close my eyes, he whispered, I see things I shouldn't. Places I've never been, people I don't know. He looked down at his hands. And sometimes, I feel like they're using me. She froze. Who? Tim, I don't know, he whispered. But I'm afraid I'll remember something I can't take back. The room seemed to shrink around them. Melissa, he said, voice breaking, what if I'm remembering someone else's guilt? She didn't know how to answer. She didn't know what was happening to him. And worst of all, she didn't know how to stop it.